All right, I think we're good to begin. So, hello everyone, welcome again. I'm Lynne Feldman from Teach the Shoah, and joining us this evening for our program is Dr. Judy Stone, Judy Wave, and Mrs. Cathy Polakoff. In our audience, we also have our co-founders, Mrs. Violet Neff Helms and Dr. Deborah Fripp. We also have yes, we still have our historian, Emily Hand, and our coffee house manager, Tanya Whitaker, and of course, many of our tellers and friends. So thank you all for joining us, and we shall begin. This evening's program marks the beginning of the deportations from Hungary, which was 82 years ago today. And we are Teach the Show Off for those who do not know us. We run many different programs, all are anchored in testimony-based Holocaust stories. We have storyteller training. We have an amazing program called Let's Pair from Survivor Memory to Living Teller, where we pair young students with living Holocaust survivors for them to learn and become memory keepers for the survivors. We have a storyteller bureau. We have different programs like the one we have today, and other programs we'll tell you about at the end. And we run Holocaust commemorations. Every program that we start starts with a story. And I will give a content warning because even though you all know you registered for a Holocaust program, it is still important to mention that some of the stories we'll be hearing tonight will be difficult. Our first story is told by Cathy, and she is telling the story of Eva. Cathy will be telling in first person, I
First
believe,
person.
in first person. All right, I shall bring down the slides. I shall spotlight Cathy for everyone.
Excuse me.
Cathy, whenever you are ready, please begin.
Okay. And the pounding started on our front door. My parents told my sister and I to go hide, but I had gotten too big to fit in any of the hiding places. So my father told me to get into bed and pretend to be sick, which I did. I pulled the covers up over my ears, faced the wall, and prayed that my fearful trembling would look like the shivers of a high fever and chills. And then I listened as the Arrow Cross, Hungary's homegrown version of the Nazis, pushed their way into our house, tossing things around, breaking things, and shouting for the children. If they had found us, they would have dragged us to the Danube and either shot or drowned us. A few moments later, I heard stomping in the hall. And then my bedroom door slammed open, and heavy boot steps came up to my bed, and a voice shouted, "Get up." I froze. I didn't know what to do. And then I heard my father come in, pleading with the Arrow Cross man. "Please, can't you see how sick she is? Please don't take her. Let her go. Can't you see she's too sick to walk?" The Arrow Cross man just laughed and said, "No matter. She doesn't have to walk far." And then again ordered me out of bed. That's when my father told him, "You don't want to take her. She's a famous Hungarian swimmer, practically a national hero. You'll be glad you didn't take her. And then silence. And finally, what's your name? I looked up at him and I answered, I'm Ava, Ava Seke. And then I watched his face, his eyes, as the recognition dawned. Those eyes were so strange. They were two different colors. I'd never seen that before. I didn't even know it was possible. And then out of the blue, he said, there's nobody here, and walked out. I sat up and stared at my open door in utter amazement as the Arrow Cross men all left, the front door shutting behind them. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that we were all still alive, that we were safe. I I was so relieved. And even with all the relief, I knew I would never forget those eyes. It wasn't long after that my family and I moved from our home in Budapest to a safe house in another part of the city. Like so many other Hungarian Jews, we had become refugees in our own country. The safe house was run by the Swedes, and it was big, 5 stories tall, but it housed 40 families. Still, when we were in there, we were safe. As long as we didn't leave, we were on Swedish soil. And that meant that the Arrow Cross and even the Nazis couldn't touch us. Unfortunately, it also meant that we were completely dependent on the Swedes for everything. Our food, our supplies, even our news. Worse, it was extremely overcrowded. There was only space for 2 rooms for each family, no matter how big that family was. And for me, the hardest part was having nowhere to exercise. As an athlete, I knew I had to stay fit. I knew that this war wouldn't last forever. And when it was over, I knew I was going to swim again. In fact, I dreamed of swimming in the Olympics. And if that was going to happen, I had to stay in shape. So I came up with my own routine. I ran up and down all 5 flights of stairs 100 times every day. I know it's a lot, but it was worth it because it worked. And I was right. As soon as the war ended, I went right back to swimming competitively. And do you know, a few years later, I actually fulfilled my lifelong dream and went to the Olympics. Not once, but twice. I even won gold. I had a fantastic swimming career. And I am so proud of every medal and trophy an award that I won in that career, except for one. I had won gold in a national competition, and I was standing on the podium with the other winners, waiting for my medal, when the announcer informed us that I was to be given a special award by a high-ranking communist official. And the award was for, I don't know, my contributions to Hungarian sports or swimming or something. I can't remember. What I do remember is watching this man walking towards me and thinking that he looked familiar. And then when he got close enough, I saw that he had two different color eyes. And I realized that this was the same man that had stood in my room all those years ago. The same man that would have killed me if my father hadn't talked him out of it. I was so shocked I almost fell over backward right off the podium. And then I was angry. How dare this man act like nothing ever happened? How dare he insinuate himself into my life, my career, as though he had some ownership of it? I knew that he recognized me, but I didn't know if he realized I also recognized him. Not that it mattered. As much as I wanted to denounce him right there, yell, scream, slap him, there was nothing I could do. So I accepted the award. But as I did, I looked him in the eyes and I thought to myself, you, Mamazer, the only one who deserves credit for my accomplishments is me. I don't remember what I did with the award. I might have thrown it away.
Of
I
course, I'm
think
still
I'm the only
muted.
one who
Thank you,
isn't.
Cathy.
I was going to say, I'm the only
You're
one who isn't muted.
you're welcome all to leave your appreciations for Cathy and Cathy's
Thank you.
story in the chat. But that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us.
Thank you.
All right. So, to give us all a little visual of Ava, this is her winning the Olympics and swimming in the Olympics. As we can see, her medal has the Soviet star on it. Just shows us the time and the place in which this photo was taken. So, Cathy, thank you for starting us off, and let's delve into some history. So, what we're seeing in front of us are a couple of photos of General Miklos Horthy. Hungary, up until World War One, was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But after World War One, Hungary becomes independent, and for almost 2 years, there's a lot of unrest within Hungary. Part of the territory that was considered previously Hungarian was taken away through the Munich Pacts at the end of the through the Paris Pacts, sorry, at the end of the war. And there is an attempt for some kind of democracy. Doesn't really work. There are there is a coup, a communist coup that starts in Hungary, and there is a lot of anti-communist, anti-Bolshevik sentiment. In March 1920, the National Assembly of Hungary declares itself as the Kingdom of Hungary. And it is unanimously voted that General Horthy would become the regent of Hungary. He previously was Ministry of War. He was a very decorated admiral, fought in World War One, had a very good reputation. And during the coup time, he was appointed as the war minister, trying to press this coup. Um, but we always have to look at how this affects not just the non-Jewish population, but also the Jewish population. Horthy was not known for being a fan of the Jews, but also not too much of an anti-Semite, if we may say so, at least not at the beginning. Things begin to change when Hitler raises to power. Horthy thinks that communicating with Hitler made much more sense than communicating with Stalin. There is a lot of, as I said, anti-communist sentiment within the people. And also, Horthy is under the impression that Hitler can be managed, that he can gain whatever he wanted, basically, from Hitler by playing along, so to speak. And it actually does seem to work at the beginning. In 1938, when Germany annexes Austria and also part of the Sudeten, um, Horthy and Hungary is awarded some land that used to be part of Hungary and then was taken away after World War One. And this allows for all the anti-Semitic laws that existed in the Reich at this point, Germany, Austria, and in the Sudeten, to also exist in Hungary. And the first law that is put upon the Jews is um, is a financial law. Almost 80% of the trade that was run by Jews was forbidden. And that is just one example. There is a lot of Nazi sentiment that seems to be growing, including a party by the name of the Iron Cross that is established in 1937. The Iron Cross is a very nationalist, Hungarian nationalist party, but also very anti-socialism, anti-capitalism, and very much anti-Semitic. So what we're seeing in front of us are the Hungarian flags together with the Nazi flags. So, so as I said, in 1938, Hungary receives a bit more land. And then again in 1940, as Hitler progresses in his conquering of Europe, more land is handed to Hungary. Um, in this case, northern Transylvania. And again, later in 1940, some more land. So this creates a very close alliance between Horthy and Hitler to the extent that when Hitler decides to backtrack from his agreement with the Soviet Union back in 1938, Hungary has to go to war together with Germany. Hungary is now basically part of this invasion force. Over 2,000 men and soldiers are sent to battle in Soviet territories. But even before that, part of the anti-Jewish laws that are brought into Hungary, this is 1940, is to create what they called work battalions. And I'm quoting work battalions because this is forced labor, men in the what they call drafting age, so from 18 to 65, were picked quite randomly, sent to these forced labors. Now, forced labor could be anything from building roads, carrying bricks from one place to another, and clearing minefields. Clearing the minefields created, obviously, many injuries and deaths at times, but forced labor itself was as it sounds. So people also died from malnutrition, from exhaustion, and also from the violence. We will pause for a minute with the history and we will go to our next story, told by Dr. Judy Stone. She will be telling the story of Magda, her mother. The story will be told in first person, and please note that there are some graphic scenes in this story. I'm going to stop the share and I will spotlight Judy. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you for the introduction. I grew up in Sárand, a small village in eastern Hungary. We were the only Jews in that town. My father owned a general store, a tavern, and a small farm. Things went pretty well for us at that time, until 1932, when most of us became ill with typhoid fever. My mother and my 5-year-old sister died. 2 other sisters and I recovered. My youngest sister, Cathy, didn't get sick. My mom didn't take her to this family wedding because she was thought to be too ugly. My family incurred huge bills from the hospitalization and funeral expenses. I had wanted to be a doctor, but I had to quit school to care for my family, being the oldest daughter. After several years, I had to leave the house and go to work. My father was surprisingly progressive. He let me choose what I wanted to do. So I went to apprentice in sewing corsets and bracelets, making braces in Debrecen, the nearby big city to Sárand in eastern Hungary. The shop owner and I fell in love, and we married in 1941 after a 6-year courtship. March 19th, 1944, the Nazis invaded Hungary, and all the Jews were forced into the ghetto, where it was very crowded. It was always in the poorest part of town. There were very poor conditions with multiple families sharing an apartment and very poor sanitation. I was very pregnant by that point. In June, I went into a painful labor with no medicines and no medical care. There was no doctor or nurse attending me. And I was angry because I later learned that I couldn't even have an aspirin. The Jews who were with us in the ghetto wouldn't share their supplies, and I never forgave that. After I delivered, a doctor came and he stitched up my tears. It was good that he did because the soldiers came and strip searched everyone looking for valuables. He saved me from that. A week later, we were moved to the brickyard in Debrecen, and there were 13,000 Jews from the city and from the surrounding little villages that were crammed together in the brickyard. Brickyards were used all over for transporting Jews to the death camp because they already had a rail line there, and it was very efficient. But there was no shelter from the sun, and we were exposed to the sun and the wind and the driving rain. I tried to protect my newborn, but it wasn't enough. I watched as he got pneumonia, and I had no medicine to give him. I sought more privacy in a corner, and I watched him nursing, and I watched as he died in my arms. And the worst part, it was awful, as I watched his tiny little fingers turn blue. A policeman pried him from my arms and forced me onto the cattle car. I was told that the police threw my baby away. We were crammed into this cattle car, 100 of us crammed together, for 5 days with no food and scant water in the heat of summer. There was no room to lay down or sit, even. There were people dying on the cattle car. We had 1 bucket of water and 1 bucket for waste. On July 1st, 1944, the doors to the cattle cars were flung open. SS and capos chased us out with whips and dogs, and there were piercing screams and shouts and the snarling of dogs. I was thrown into this faceless crowd with guards hurriedly moving us along. But then it was very odd. I heard this beautiful music. Thought all the musicians, finest musicians in Europe, had been gathered there together to greet us. But the Jewish musicians were forced to play to lend an air of normalcy to our arrival and to improve our compliance. But soon the guards and the dogs came back, and they marched us 2 miles from Auschwitz I to Auschwitz II Birkenau, where we were stripped, shorn of all of our hair, deloused, and then warehoused in stark barracks. Each of these barracks had 1,000 other women in it. Can you imagine 1,000 women just in this box with the dirt floor? It was so crowded we slept on top of each other. There were no toilets. There was only an open outdoor trench where we were exposed to everyone to see. The lack of privacy was terrible. We were watched all the time. There was the stench of vomit and diarrhea, unwashed bodies, and an acrid smell that burned my nose and my eyes, but I couldn't quite place it at first. One morning, while I was squatting over the trench with diarrhea, a capo, a Jew who was in colluding with the Nazis, a capo beat me for being so slow. I got a fever and I wanted to die. Friends dragged me to the Appel, a roll call, or I would have been killed. At the next day's delousing shower, an SS guard saw bruises and beat me again because I must have done something. Friends huddled around me in the barracks so my sister Cathy and guards wouldn't see my bruises. Cathy had changed places with another prisoner and snuck over to my barracks to be with me. Each day, roused with reveille at 4 a.m., we had to stand in formation for hours, twice a day, each time a torture. We weren't given water or food, and even if we were sick or had diarrhea, we had to let the stool run down our legs. We were always placed in lines of 5. The stronger women tried to shelter those who were ill. They hid us in the middle of the row so the guards were less likely to see us. And that was great that we tried to take care of each other, even under those circumstances. If someone collapsed, it meant a beating and possible death. I survived because I was young and had been in excellent physical shape, and because I had the support in camp from my friends and my young sister. I had been her mother growing up after our mother died, and here she became like my mother after I lost my baby, and she did so much to take care of me. After 10 weeks after 10 weeks in Auschwitz, I was sent to work in the Argus airplane factory. There too, we had to stand for 12-hour shifts working on a dangerous machinery line, plus there were long roll calls twice a day. We still had little food. The conditions there, the work was so hard and my back hurt so much that at one point I tried killing myself by cutting my hand and letting it get infected. That was so painful, but it didn't work, and I was sent back to work. After a while, not wanting the Allies to discover the concentration camps, the Nazis forced us on a march for many days. We went 150 miles by foot to the North Sea to a town called Rostock, where we were to be traded for medicines and supplies. Again, we were in rows of 5, and women tried to care for those who were weaker. The stronger women took the outside and even helped carry some of the weaker women. Because women who collapsed, they were left behind to starve or they were shot by the guards. In Rostock, we were liberated by the Russians there. I'm told I weighed about 65 pounds. Somehow, I managed to walk and catch an occasional train back to Berlin and then to Budapest and eventually home. All the while, I was looking for others. But when I got back to Hungary, the world I remembered wasn't there anymore. I wandered the streets of Debrecen, lost in a haze of grief and weakness. Friends found me and nursed me back to health. People had stolen our home and our belongings. In Debrecen, people had stolen the apartment and business my husband and I had had. And in Sharand, they had taken over our house and used it as a stable. And neighbors had dug up valuables my father had buried in our yard. Because I had been pregnant, everyone thought that I must have died. And so they weren't really looking for me initially. But by word of mouth, my husband discovered that I was still alive, and he came back looking for me, and we were reunited. It was clear that we couldn't stay in Hungary, although we tried to. My youngest sister, Cathy, had been liberated near an American Air Force base in Germany. As news trickled out through radio and news announcements and by word of mouth, all of the family made their way there. My husband and I crossed over the border from Hungary illegally. I that was the only way you could go. We had to sneak across. We had to stay there more than 3 years waiting for a visa. I had another baby while we were there, and he almost died of carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. We only discovered that he was ill because my husband brought his mistress to see his baby. We rushed little Yoshi to the doc. Sorry, we rushed little Judy to the doctor and held his head out the window of the car so he would get more air. We were only able to emigrate from Germany because my husband's elderly great uncle provided a letter of support. You had to have a letter of support promising that you wouldn't be a burden on the US in order to leave. But his grandchildren got measles right before we got there, so we weren't able to stay with him. And the highest, the Hebrew Aid Agency, placed us in a fourth floor walk-up in the Lower East Side. That was really hard for me because I was trying to carry this toddler and my back still hurt, never recovered from the injuries I had from the beatings. 2 weeks later, my toddler became ill with measles. I didn't speak English except for the phrase, "goddamn dippies," displaced persons, commonly used by the GIs where we lived in Germany. So I didn't understand why two men came and wordlessly took my son away. He was just snatched from me, and I didn't know what happened to him. After a while, my aunt told me that he was taken to an infectious disease hospital, but we couldn't visit him for some time. I was devastated. As you might imagine, this incident rekindled my anguish over having lost my newborn Yoshi in the ghetto. My husband worked as a delivery boy and doing manual labor in New York again, and after some time, he found work making corsets and braces. In telling my story, I might seem too unemotional to you. I have to shut down some to try to protect myself from the repeated trauma. I still often have nightmares about this. For the survivors and children, the Holocaust didn't end in 1945. The trauma continues until this day.
Listen, Judy, thank you so much.
Division. It's hard.
It is.
It's hard.
Uh, it is. And thank you so much for sharing with us your mother's story. Everyone, please leave your appreciations for Judy in the chat. I'm sure she would love to read that. And to give us a bit of a visual, let us go back to the slides. So, Judy, can you just tell us about the three beautiful ladies in the photo?
Judy is muted.
Muted. Sorry. On the left is my mother in 1940 or 41 or so. It's my father's favorite picture of her when they were engaged. And on the right are the Three of the four sisters were in Auschwitz, as it turned out. Bridget was in another part of the camp. She was in Canada, sorting the clothes and belongings of people who had been brought for extermination. And there's quite a story about how she learned that her father had been killed. And then in the middle is Cathy, who was 11 years younger than my mother, and my mother, who clearly looked somewhat worse for wear after her experiences in the camp. The fourth sister was in hiding during which was no picnic, and she was raped by the person who was hiding her and impregnated by him.
And to learn more about Judy's story, I will later on put into the chat a link to Judy's website where you can buy her book Resilience, which tells the full family story. Highly recommended.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. So we are going to continue with our Hungarian path. So actually, I'm going to take down the slides for a minute because it's nicer to look at everybody instead of just looking at a slide. So, as I mentioned before, Horthy was not known for his love of Jews, but also he wasn't too much of an avid anti-Semite as some other people within his government. But in 1941, before the invasion into the East, approximately 18,000 Jews who were non-Hungarian citizens were the first people to be deported out of Hungary. They were sent to what is today Ukraine, to their inevitable death, because right after their deportation, the invasion into the East begins, and Ukraine was one of the first countries to be invaded. And well, more about the invasion you can learn about next month when we start our next series of Echoes from the Past, which will be dealing with the Holocaust by bullets and the invasion to the East. So I will not waste more of our time today on that. So the invasion begins, and the demand for the participation of Hungary in the war and in the war efforts has come from Hitler. And Horthy sends 200,000 soldiers out to the front. Now, it's important to mention that out of the 200,000, 40,000 were Jewish men. At this point, Hungarian men are still citizens of Hungary, and therefore, when the draft comes to go to war, they go to war. The Hungarian battalions find themselves going closer and closer to what is today Stalingrad, Leningrad. And of course, this is the turning point of the war. Fighting within the Soviet Union does not go well for Germany, but also not for the Hungarians. At the end, in 1943, the battles that the Hungarians are in are lost. Approximately 80,000 men die in battle. Some of them were, of course, Jewish as well. This defeat on the Hungarian side does not go down well with Hitler, obviously. And obviously, the Hungarian soldiers weren't the only ones losing in battle. The Wehrmacht is losing, and the Nazis are losing more and more territory as the Soviets are progressing. And by the end of 1943, the Soviets are almost at the entrance to Hungary. Now, Horthy realizes that being in this very close-knit relationship with Hitler will not go well for him when Germany loses the war. and he tries to sever his connections. Putting that together with the loss in battle creates a bit of a havoc for our general, and he gets summoned by Hitler to Salzburg in March of 1944. He gets told off by Hitler, who, in his Hitler manner, is screaming and shouting and demanding the participation of Hungary in more of the war efforts, and more importantly, to solve the Jewish problem in Hungary. Now I'm going to pause for a minute. The Jews in Hungary, though not a very large percentage of the population, were very much assimilated and acculturated, and very much part of the Hungarian fabric. So yes, approximately 18,000 were sent away, but they weren't citizens, and that was a way for Horthy to excuse the deportations to himself. But before he gets summoned by Hitler, Horthy has a meeting with a very dear and close friend of his who happened to be Jewish. And within the conversation, it is told that this particular friend starts telling Horthy what actually happens to Jews who are deported. We heard some of that from Judy. What happens to Jews who get sent away? They end up in places like Auschwitz and other camps. And it is told that Horthy's reaction to this is inhumane. This is against the Hungarian character. This cannot be done. So while Hitler is screaming and shouting in Salzburg, Horthy caves in a tiny bit, and he agrees to deport 10,000 men, Jewish men. But he refuses to go any number above this. And at this point in Hungary, at the beginning of 1944, there are 7,006, there's about 700,000 Jewish people in Hungary, and another 100,000 who were converted Jews, converted to Christianity. Of course, according to the racial laws, the German Nazi racial laws, they're considered Jews. So approximately 800,000 Jews. So Horthy agrees 10,000. That's the number. Hitler is not satisfied, tells him to do better, and sends him home. But as Horthy returns to Budapest, he starts to understand that this whole meeting was a bit of a facade. Because he returns to Hungary, and on the 19th of March, 1944, the Wehrmacht has already marched in to Hungary, and occupation begins. Horthy is basically demoted. He's not kicked out, he's not executed, he's demoted. He can no longer be in power. Who gets power? Our friends from the Iron Cross, and I say friends with many. So the Iron Cross, being as anti-Semitic as they are very happy to comply with Hitler's demand to take care of the Jewish problem in Hungary. And to do so, we need good bureaucrats. I'm going to bring back the slides. So this is one of the armbands from the Iron Cross. And this is the head of the Iron Cross party. So I'm gonna botch his name up completely because my Hungarian is terrible. Szálasi.
Szálasi.
Thank you. Always need a good Hungarian speaker in the audience. And he is willing to do what it takes and even a bit beyond. The administrator or the clerk that's sent to Hungary to make sure that everything happens as it should is Adolf Eichmann. The same Adolf Eichmann who was the clerk that sat in the Wannsee conference taking notes about how to deport Jews. So he's very well aware of what are the logistics that are needed to move Jews from one place to another. So the first stage is in all the different smaller villages, towns, farms. Let's gather the Jews together. We'll put them in small holding places. And like we heard in Magda's story, Judy's story, some could be in a brickyard, some could be in a factory. A ghetto is not necessarily a closed off section of a city. And here we have a photo of a brickyard in Munkac. Um, and as we can see, it's not much, doesn't have the barbed wire fences that we're used to seeing from other photos. It's just a few warehouses and people are shoved in there. And the next stage is to put them onto trains and send them to Poland or to the, Poland doesn't exist, to the Generalgouvernement, mainly to Auschwitz, but some do end up also in other camps like Majdanek. But this isn't all that they do. They also, the Iron Cross, terrorize, manipulate, vandalize Jews everywhere, mainly within Budapest. Within 8 weeks, more than 40,000 Jews are deported out of Hungary, leaving most of Hungary, as the Germans say, Judenrein, free of Jews, clean of Jews. In Budapest, on the other hand, there are still Jews. There's over 200,000 Jews in Budapest alone. One of the worst stories that we know in city environments is the story of the Red Danube, in which the Iron Cross gathered Jews at the banks of the Danube in rows of five, tied them up to each other, shoot one, and watch them fall into the river. It is estimated that about 80,000 men, women, and children were shot at the Danube. Very, very few survived. Let's go back to our. Those who were deported ended up in Auschwitz. And what we are seeing in front of us are four photos from what is known as the Auschwitz album. The Auschwitz album documented 8 transports that arrived over the span of 2 days from Hungary to Auschwitz. This is the most detailed documentation that we have, created by 5 different Nazi soldiers who were posted in Auschwitz, of what happens to a deportation from the minute it arrives in Birkenau. If you want to know more about the album and about what actually happens in Auschwitz, please visit our YouTube channel. There is a program there commemorating 80 years for the liberation of Auschwitz that goes very much into detail about both the album and Auschwitz itself. 8 weeks. Within those 8 weeks of terror, where Jews are being rounded up and deported, we also see the light in the darkness, and that is in the form of the righteous. And I'm going to mention only a few, and I'm not going to tell you too much about each one of them because we don't have all the time in the world, unfortunately. But we have in front of us 2 very distinguished gentlemen, Raoul Wallenberg and Karl Lutz. Both were diplomats stationed in Budapest at the time of the Nazi occupation. Wallenberg was an incredible man who decided that he would use his own funds as well as the Swedish embassy at which he worked to help as many Jews as he can. He saw that the Swiss and Karl Lutz created what they called safe houses. Basically, buildings that the embassy claimed as their territory, and as such, and as being a neutral country during the war, nobody could step into them in most parts. So Wallenberg started buying buildings and creating certificates for different people who acquired either visas or citizenships. Of course, most of these papers were fake. We have documented only 4,500 certificates that Wallenberg actually produced. But in practice, he saved close to 100,000 people through these certificates, through the safe houses, and through even going to stop people who were already about to go onto one of those cattle cards, waving certificates saying, no, no, these are our Jews. They need to come back. Wallenberg, as the Soviets enter Budapest, is taken for interrogation by the Soviets for cooperating with the Nazis and has not been heard of since. It is assumed that he died at some point, probably within a few years, in the Soviet Union. Wallenberg was, of course, recognized as the righteous among the nations by Yad Vashem. Karl Lutz also ran a very vast operation of safe houses and Schutzpasses. These are these documents that allowed people to stay in the safe houses or to declare that they were part of the Swiss nationals and so on, and had work within the embassy. And Lutz himself, who was a diplomat, was working, of course, for the Swiss embassy. And through his amazing work, he saved over 65,000 people. When the war was over and Lutz returned home to Switzerland, he was actually trialed as someone who cooperated with the Nazis. He was demoted in his position with the Foreign Office, lost his pension, and only after the Lutz survivors petitioned for him to be recognized as a righteous, that all the allegations against him in Switzerland be removed, and he was reinstated with his position at the Foreign Office. And one of the amazing things that Lutz did was to work together with a group of Jewish um, young people from different youth movements, creating basically a factory that created all these false documents, all the false Schutzpasses. Place was called the Glass House. It was an old glass factory that Lutz acquired. And through this factory itself, through the glass house, 5,000 Jews were saved with the certificates. Many of them were young teens. And in front of us, we have Israel Kastner. Kastner was a Jew, a Hungarian Jew. And as the war progressed in Europe, he worked very closely with the Jewish community, trying to get as many Jews to leave Hungary while it was still possible. Wasn't really possible. Hungary doesn't have an out to the sea, but you do have the Danube, and you can move from country to country. Very dangerously, we should say. Most of Europe is already occupied. And when Hungary itself is occupied by the Nazis, Kastner and many other people from within the Jewish community, within the leadership of the Jewish community, come together trying to figure out what is the best way to try and save Jews. And Kastner is of the opinion that the way to do this is to go and speak to the Nazis and to try and buy Jews, for lack of a better term. And he succeeds. He has negotiations with Eichmann and with other people who were sent to form some kind of internal hierarchy of Nazis within the Hungarian puppet government. Kastner ends up buying a train, a full train of Jews, 1,700. The deal was called Jews for gold, for lack of a better term, I guess. Kastner himself survives the war. He doesn't go onto that train. It's important to say. He survives in Hungary. Um, all 1,700 Jews from the train managed to make it safely out of Hungary and out of Europe. Most of them came to, at the time, mandatory Palestine, today Israel. Kastner himself comes to Israel um, in the 1950s. The photo that we see in front of us is a photo of him giving testimony in court. And I will just end by saying that there was a lot of public debate about this action that he took in buying his fellow Jews into freedom. Um, until today, actually, it's a hot topic in Israel. And yes, we still have a few minutes to talk about memory. So I'll actually first take this slide off. And I will say the occupation in Hungary ends when the Soviets come in. And you would think that that would allow the Jews to leave, to live freely or have some kind of sigh of relief by being liberated by the Soviets, but that was not the case. At this point, so late in the war, when the Soviets have already seen many things that have happened, um, and really disliking mainly the Arab Cross and their gendarmes, apart from battling with them in the streets, they also end up being quite violent towards the general population, including the Jews. And there's a lot of unrest that takes quite a while until things semi-settle down in Hungary, up until the revolution, the next revolution that happens. But Hungary remains under Soviet occupation, which comes with its own toll. And many Jews found it very difficult to leave Hungary at the end of the war. Those who did, like we heard from Magda's story, find themselves going to Germany, to DP camps, and then making their way either to America, Australia, or the state of Israel when it's founded. But as we heard from Cathy's story, some Jews do remain and find themselves under the Soviet regime for many, many years. And as we saw in the photo of Eva with the Soviet star on her gold medal. Um, so let's talk a bit about memory. So under Soviet regime, it is very difficult to create any kind of memorials for anything that is not Soviet. So we find all over the ex-Soviet countries that any monument dedicated to the atrocities of the Holocaust are actually monuments for the either Great Patriotic War or for peaceful Soviet civilians who died by the fascist regimes. And the same happens in Hungary. And we find that there are a few Jewish attempts to memorialize. The most known one was on the flyer for our event today, which is the Weeping Willow. It's a tree created outside the Great Synagogue in Budapest, with every leaf has the name of one of the Hungarian victims engraved. Excuse me. And sorry. That's what happens when you talk so much. I apologize. But but that's within almost Jewish territory, right? It's next to a synagogue. And we find that only in the late 90s, real commemoration begins in Hungary. I'll bring back the slide to show. And the most known monument are the shoes on the Danube, representing the Red Danube, the murder on the riverbanks. It is one of the most impressive monuments I've seen. This is only a small portion of it. I couldn't get everything into one photo. Um, and there's something about just having shoes or a shoe that gets people thinking and talking, and it's the kind of place where people do come to reflect and talk. The second monument that we see in front of us is the Glass House, which is part of the Testimony House in Nir Galim in Israel. Nir Galim was a moshav founded by survivors of the Glass House and a few other Hungarian survivors, all um, very young adults who arrive in Israel, come together and live together. Up until 1996, um, all those survivors were very busy living their own lives and not dealing at all with the fact that they were Holocaust survivors. They all started families, found work, and lived a full life. This moshav that they built was, when they built it, not too far from the seafront in the south of Israel, near a city called Ashdod. And in the 1990s, the Israeli government decided to build a power plant between the beach and this moshav. And power plants have towers with chimneys. And as Judy said, for survivors, the trauma continues after the war. And the survivors of the glass house in Nir Galim realized that they need to deal with the fact that this reminds them of the Holocaust, but also of their past. And what do they do? And how do they commemorate? And their idea was to build a little museum. And the little museum began with small replicas of synagogues from all over Hungary that were created from little matches. And when it became a museum with a bit more funding, they reconstructed the facade of the glass house, which is what I showed you. Today, there's an interactive display in there telling the story of Karl Lutz and the Budapest youth movement and how they came together to save 5,000 Jews. And that is only a few of the commemorative acts that we have for the Hungarian jury. Now, I could have talked for another 3 hours, but our programs are usually no longer than 90 minutes to allow also some time for a discussion. So I'm just going to pop up the slides again to tell you a bit. Of course, we're going to move into a Q&A in a minute. Just to tell you that at the end of this month, on Thursday the 28th, we have a coffee house with Toby. Fascinating story. I do recommend you join us. We will pop the link in afterwards. So I'm going to take down the slides. So I want to be conscious of the time. We have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to use those 2 minutes just to say thank you again. I'll stay on for a bit longer after. The recording of this will come up without the Q&A because this is amongst us and we never post that. We only post the program section. Please join us in our coffee house at the end of the month, or more like join Tanya, who will be running, facilitating the program. Join us next month for Echoes of the Past on the 21st, the beginning of the invasion to the east. We will be delving into a very difficult history. And also the following day on the 22nd, please join us on our live stream watching our third gala of Resaper, where our students will be graduating and telling their stories to their survivors and giving their promise to become their memory keepers. You're in for a treat when it comes to that program. So thank you all very much. Please stay in touch. You can reach us through Facebook, Instagram, of course, our YouTube channel. Our emails are our first names at Teach the Show, so Lynne at Teach the Show, Deborah at Teach the Show, and Cathy at Teach the Show, and Emily, who's still here, and Emily at Teach the Show, and Violet at Teach the Show. So thank you all very much. Have a great evening or day for those of you in Singapore, and hope to see you soon.